It's a Spotify podcast.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rabbit Holes Deep Dives. Tonight, we're going to talk about the quantum deadline. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every lock on your house still works. Front door, back door, garage, windows, nothing has been broken. Nobody has picked the locks. Nobody has even demonstrated that they can. And yet, the locksmith calls and tells you something strange. You need to replace every lock anyway. Not because they're broken today, because someone may be building a tool that can open them tomorrow. Now scale that house up. Your bank, your medical records, your email, your phone, government networks, military communications, software updates, digital identities, online shopping, cloud computing, the certificates that tell your browser you're actually talking to your bank instead of somebody pretending to be your bank. Modern civilization quietly depends on mathematical locks. And right now, many of those locks still work. But governments and technology companies have already started replacing them. NIST, N-I-S-T, has finalized a new post-quantum cryptography standard. Google has set 2029 as a migration deadline. Asteroid is beginning to rebuild parts of its trust architecture around quantum-resistant signatures. Cloud systems are starting to support quantum-resistant key exchange. Quantum computer capable of breaking the crypt. Welcome to Rabbit Holes Deep Dives. This is where we follow the research, separate prediction from evidence, and try to understand what is actually changing beneath all the headlines. Tonight, we're going into quantum computing. But this is not really a story about quantum computers. It's a story about time, about risk, about uncertainty, and about what civilization does when the threat isn't there yet. But preparation for it may take longer than the threat takes to arrive. The lock that still works. Every time you visit a secure website, something remarkable happens. Your computer and the distant server have to establish trust. They may never have communicated before. They may be separated by thousands of miles. And yet, within fractions of a second, they need to agree on secret information and verify identities in a way that an attacker cannot easily fake. That problem is one of the reasons public key cryptography became so important. Public key cryptography lets us do something that sounds almost impossible. Share one piece of information publicly, while keeping another mathematically linked piece secret. The public key can help encrypt information or verify a digital signature. The private key stays private. The system works because certain mathematical problems are extraordinarily difficult for ordinary computers. Not impossible, difficult. So difficult that solving them with classical machines can require absurd amounts of computation. That difficulty protects enormous parts of the modern digital life. And here's the strange thing. Those mathematical problems haven't suddenly stopped being difficult. Your bank's encryption didn't wake up broken this morning. The certificate protecting a secure website didn't suddenly evaporate. There is no publicly known fault-tolerant quantum computer sitting somewhere casually decrypting global internet traffic. So why is NIST telling organizations to migrate? Because security doesn't care only about what is possible today. Security cares about what could become possible during a lifetime of the information you're protecting. And that's the first clue. The new post-quantum standards are not an emergency patch for a system that has already failed. They're a bridge built before the flood arrives. The question is whether water ever gets high enough to need it. To understand that, we have to understand the machine everyone is worried about. The machine that changes the math. A quantum computer is not simply a very fast, normal computer. That's one of the biggest misconceptions in the entire conversation. Your laptop processes ordinary bits, zeros and one. Quantum computers use quantum bits, or qubits. The quantum mechanics allows those systems to behave in a way that do not map exactly into ordinary digital logic. Superposition, entanglement, interference. Those words sound exotic because they are. But here's the important part. Quantum computers do not automatically make every calculation faster. For many tasks, a classical computer may remain perfectly adequate. Quantum advantage depends on specific algorithms exploring quantum structure. One of those algorithms is why cryptographers care. In 1994, mathematician Peter Shor showed that sufficiently capable quantum computers could solve certain number theory problems dramatically more efficiently than known classical methods. Those problems sit underneath important public key systems, RSA, elliptic curve cryptography, digital signatures, key exchanges. So the threat is not quantum computers are magical. The threat is quantum computers may attack some of the exact mathematical assumptions modern security depends upon. But there is a huge caveat. Shor's algorithm existing on paper is not the same thing as running it against real internet scale keys. You need quantum computer large enough, stable enough, accurate enough, and fault-tolerant enough to complete the calculation before noise destroys the result. Today's quantum hardware is impressive, but cryptographically relevant quantum computing requires something much harder. Logical qubits, error correction, massive control systems, reliable operations over long computational sequences. This is where the argument becomes interesting, because the question is no longer, can quantum theory break the math? In principle, yes. The question is, when can engineering build a machine large enough to do it in practice? And nobody knows that date, which creates a strange cybersecurity problem. How do you prepare for a deadline that isn't written in the calendar? The deadline nobody can agree upon. In August of 2024, NIST finalized its first 3 post-quantum cryptography standards. Naomi, strike that. In August of 2024, NIST finalized its first 3 post-quantum cryptography standards. After years of international evaluation, the agency didn't simply publish them and say, interesting research, use these someday. It encouraged organizations to start migrating immediately. Why? Because cryptographic transitions are slow. Imagine replacing the mathematical foundations of digital trust across governments, corporations, mobile devices, cloud infrastructure, industrial machines, and embodied systems. You don't flip a switch. You inventory cryptography. You find where vulnerable algorithms exist. You update protocols. You replace software, sometimes hardware. You test interoperability. You replace certificates. You update standards. You maintain compatibility with systems that cannot change immediately. And then you discover something terrifying. Some organizations don't even know it. Naomi, strike that. Some organizations don't even know everywhere they're using cryptography. That's why NIST's migration project includes cryptographic discovery. Before replacing vulnerable algorithms, you have to find them. Then Google adds another piece to the puzzle. Google has publicly set 2029 as its own post-quantum migration deadline. Not because Google's claims a cryptographically relevant quantum computer definitely arrives in 2029. That's an important distinction. Google's own documentation frames 2029 as a risk horizon based on the possibility that current research progress continues. That is not certainty, it's planning. And then in 2026, the debate became more urgent. Nature reported on 2 analyses suggesting the resources required for some quantum cryptographic attacks may be lower than many researchers previously assumed. Again, that does not mean someone has built the machine. It means the estimates changed. And when estimates change, deadlines can move. This is the part of the technology forecasting that almost never makes good headlines. People want a date. Q day. The day quantum computers break encryption. But technological revolutions almost never arrive on one clean day. They may be no dramatic midnight when the world suddenly changes. Instead, capability improves. Error rates fall. Logical qubits become more reliable. Resource estimates improve. Algorithms become much more efficient. Hardware scales. And somewhere along that curve, someone gains the ability to attack a key that used to be considered safe. The problem is that defenders don't get to start preparing at that moment. If migration takes 10 years and the machine arrives in 8, being correct about the threat doesn't help you. You were still late. But that's another reason organizations can't simply wait. Because an attacker may not need the quantum computer today. They may only need your encrypted data. Steal now, encrypt later. Imagine your intelligence service, or a cyber criminal organization, or an industrial espionage operation. You intercept encrypted information, but you can't read it today. So what do? One option is surprisingly simple. Save it. Store the encrypted traffic. Keep it for years. And if future computing eventually breaks that protection, decrypt the old information later. This threat model is often called harvest now, decrypt later. And suddenly the quantum problem changes. The attack doesn't begin when the quantum computer exists. The attack can begin when the data is captured. That's why the value of information over time matters. Your lunch order probably doesn't need to remain secret for 30 years. Military intelligence might. Medical records might. Government communications might. Trade secrets might. Identity information might. Diplomatic cables might. Research data might. Some information has long shelf lives. And if that information is being collected today, then waiting until quantum decryption becomes practical could already be too late. This is one reason Google recommends post-quantum key exchange now in some cloud environments. The objective isn't simply protecting future traffic. It's reducing the risk that today's encrypted traffic becomes tomorrow's readable archive. And now the story becomes much larger than quantum computers. It's about time asymmetry. Attackers can collect first, decrypt later. Defenders have to protect first and hope the protection lasts. That is an uncomfortable security equation because it creates incentives to migrate before proof of the threat exists. But early migration creates its own risks. New algorithms have to be implemented correctly. Systems have to remain compatible. Keys can be larger. Signatures can be larger. Old hardware may struggle. Protocols can break. Software ecosystems can fragment. And whenever cryptography changes, implementation bugs can create vulnerabilities entirely unrelated to quantum computing. So, organizations are increasingly using hybrid systems. Classical cryptography plus post-quantum cryptography as well. 2 locks instead of 1. If the new mathematics turns out to contain some unexpected weaknesses, the old protection remains. If the old cryptography eventually falls to quantum attack, the new protection remains. At least that's the design goal. Notice how different this is from the popular story. The popular story is quantum computer appears, encryption dies, change follows. The real story is much slower. Standards, procurement, compatibility, migration, certificates, cloud infrastructure, operating systems, legacy devices, boring things. And history is often changed by boring things because infrastructure revolutions rarely look dramatic while they're happening. They look like updates. Rebuilding trust before Q-Day. So let's imagine 2 futures. In the first, the quantum breakthrough takes much longer than expected. 10 years pass, 20 years, maybe more. Organizations complete expensive migrations. New cryptographic standards become normal. And the catastrophic machines everyone feared still hasn't arrived. Was the migration wasted? Not necessarily. Because cryptographic agility has value even without quantum catastrophe. Systems that can adapt are generally better prepared for future cryptographic failures of any kind. Now imagine the second future. A series of breakthroughs accelerates fault-tolerant quantum computing. Resources requirements continues failing. Logical qubit scale. Someone reaches cryptographic capability earlier than expected. If migration has already happened, the event may be historically important, but if not, catastrophic. If migration has not happened, then millions of systems could suddenly depend upon mathematics that no longer provides the protection everyone assumed. That is why the deadline matters. Not because anyone knows the date, because nobody does. The entire post-quantum migration is a giant exercise in uncertainty management. How early is too early? How late is too late? How much money should society spend preparing for a machine that may arrive later than predicted? And what happens when the cost of being wrong is asymmetric? If you migrate early, you spend money. You create engineering headaches. You replace systems sooner than necessary. If you migrate late, you may expose information that cannot be unexposed. That's the deeper logic. And I want to return to the opening image, the locksmith. The lock that still works. The tool that doesn't exist yet. At first, replacing that lock sounds irrational, almost paranoid. But then you learn something. The lock sits in a vault. Inside that vault are secrets that must remain secret for decades. Replacing the lock takes years. And someone may already be photographing everything passing through the door. Now the decision looks different. That is the quantum deadline. Not a countdown to one magical day. A race between two timelines. The timeline of quantum capability and the timeline of cryptographic migration. Whichever one finished first may shape the security of the digital world for decades. And we still don't know which one is ahead. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What should civilization do when a threat is technologically plausible? Historically, consequential, but chronologically uncertain. How much preparation is wisdom? How much is fear? What evidence should move the deadline forward? What evidence should move it back? And if someone eventually does build a machine capable of breaking today's public key cryptography, will history remember that moment as the beginning of the crisis? Or will the real turning point have happened years earlier? When institutions quietly started changing the locks? If today's episode made you think, don't stop here. Read the research, study history, examine original documents, listen to the experts, listen to the critics, listen to the people who disagree with you, question sensational claims, question the official explanations, question the headline, your assumptions, and question mine. Because today's rabbit holes deep dives is not about handing you a conclusion. It's about following the evidence, even when the evidence leads somewhere uncomfortable. What evidence changed your thinking? Which claim deserves more investigation? What did we miss? Which assumptions should we challenge next? And what rabbit hole should we go down next? Share this episode with someone willing to examine the evidence. Join the conversations. Challenge the ideas respectfully. Keep asking questions, because every answer opens another question, and every question leads us further down the rabbit hole. My name is Leroy Nellis, and this is Resilience Radio. Godspeed, stand for the Constitution, and never surrender your ability to think for yourself. God bless, and good night. Hey everybody, I wanted to sit down with you today and talk about something we've been working on behind the scenes for quite a while now. First, I want to thank you. Whether you've been here from the beginning or you just found the channel recently, I want you to know that I genuinely appreciate every single one of you. Every comment, every conversation, every suggestion, every word of encouragement has helped shape what Resilience Radio is becoming. This isn't just my channel anymore. It's about a community. And because of that, I wanted you to hear these changes directly from me. Over the last several months, we've been doing something a little unusual. We've been studying our analytics almost obsessively. Not just YouTube analytics, but the analytics coming from Naomi, the AI production system we've been building from the ground up. We've been asking questions like, what videos do people come here for? What keeps people watching? What topics naturally fit together? And what happens when we mix very little types of content on the same channel? After looking at thousands of data points, we came to one conclusion. It's time to let each series become a very best version of itself. So today, I'm excited to announce that Rabbit Holes is becoming its own dedicated YouTube channel. Rabbit Holes deserves its own home. It's where we dive into mysteries, history, unsolved questions, and rabbit holes. Strange events, forgotten stories, and all of those fascinating topics that make us lose track of time. By giving Rabbit Holes its own channel, YouTube can better understand who those videos are for. Our AI can learn from much cleaner data, and we can build something truly special for people who love those deep dives. Resilience Radio will continue doing what it has always meant to do, help people understand themselves through psychology,
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me out like the numbers didn't matter. But pressure builds diamonds in the dark, and I've been sharpening my edge in the chatter. Every scar turned into strategy, every setback fueled my clarity. I took the hits, learned the game, turned my losses into flame. Now I'm coming back strong, and you'll remember my name. I'm rising through the fire.